Oh, Chloe just cleans up around the military barracks. Kind of like a janitor. It pays the bills, I guess. My mother waved her hand, flashing a rehearsed socialite smile at my sister's future in-laws. My father didn't even bother looking up from his plate, nodding along. Honestly, every family has one disappointment, right? We gave up on her a long time ago. 23 people, including the groom's wealthy and powerful family, stared at me. And then the mother of the groom, a powerhouse of a woman I had sat across from in a classified briefing room just 18 months ago, set her fork down, looked me dead in the eye, and whispered, "Hold on. Are you the major?" My mother went pale. What happened over the next 40 minutes broke something in my family that I don't think we'll ever put back together. But that dinner was just the explosion. The fuse had been burning for 10 years. Welcome to Family Honor Stories. Before we dive into this one, please take a second to hit like and subscribe. It helps out a ton. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love reading them. Now let me tell you exactly what happened in that suffocating room when my family's lies started to cave in. Catherine Ellsworth's words hung in the air. The private dining room at the Birchwood froze solid. I didn't blink. Out in the dirt, when an IED goes off, you don't scream. You don't thrash around. You check your limbs. You assess the damage. My jaw locked tight. My spine stayed rigid against the back of the mahogany chair, slipping effortlessly into the muscle memory of parade rest. 23 pairs of eyes snapped toward me. The silence was thick, heavy enough to choke on. At the head of the table, my mother's rehearsed smile melted right off her face. Her skin turned a sickly ashen gray. She gripped the linen tablecloth so hard her knuckles bleached white against the fabric. She opened her mouth, desperate to patch the hole in her perfect narrative. A weak, high-pitched breath escaped her throat. But Catherine didn't let her speak. The former Admiral's gaze was lethal. It pinned my mother to her seat. No one moved. The only sound was the ice shifting in my father's bourbon glass. A pathetic, hollow clink. I shifted my eyes just a fraction toward Paige. My golden child sister shrank back into her chair. She wore a custom silk evening gown. Her manicured fingers nervously twisted a massive diamond engagement ring. The ambient restaurant light caught the facets of the stone. It made me sick to my stomach. I remembered the freezing nights in the trenches, rationing cold MREs, hoarding every single dime of my hazard pay just to wire it back to Carver. To help your sister out, my mother had said. Every dollar I sent home was coated in mud sweat and copper-tasting blood. And they took it. They took it to buy this hollow, shiny life. Then they sat down at a 5-star restaurant and called me a garbage collector. I looked down at my own chest, a cheap $15 navy blue blouse from a discount rack. The thin fabric was barely enough to hide the thick, raised keloid shrapnel scar biting into my left shoulder blade. My hands rested on my lap, calloused, scarred, the hands of a grunt sitting quietly across from the hands of a princess I had paid to crown. The air in the room was getting stale, drenched in Diane's overwhelming cheap rose perfume. I needed a clear perimeter. "Excuse me," I said. My voice didn't shake. The volume was low, but it cut through the room like a combat knife. I pushed my chair back. The wooden legs scraped harshly against the floorboards. I stood up and walked away from the table. I didn't wait for permission. I didn't look back to see their reactions. The heavy oak door of the private room clicked shut behind me. The hallway was empty. It was lined with deep red carpet that swallowed the sound of my sensible flat shoes. Underneath my calm exterior, my pulse hammered against my ribs. The ultimate betrayal doesn't come from an enemy rifle. It comes from the mouth of the woman who gave birth to you. The very people who are supposed to have your six are the ones chambering around behind your back. I walked straight toward the quiet lounge area in the front lobby. I just needed a glass of ice water. I needed to reset. The lobby was deserted. The smell of old leather and floor wax hung in the air. Sitting right in the center of a small glass coffee table was Paige's phone, a glittery pink case. She must have left it behind when they rushed in to kiss up to the groom's parents. I walked past it toward the water pitcher. Suddenly the screen lit up. The harsh glare caught my eye. A new notification from the Holloway family group chat. I stopped. I stepped closer, looking down at the screen. The words hit me square in the chest, clear as a set of bombing coordinates. Mom, remember the plan. Absolutely do not let Chloe open her mouth tonight. The Ellsworths do not need to know we have a glorified janitor in the family. My stomach bottomed out. This wasn't a slip of the tongue. It wasn't a careless mistake to save face in the heat of the moment. It was a calculated strike. They had intel. They had a strategy. And they all agreed to bury me alive before the appetizers even hit the table. I didn't cry. Crying was for victims. I slid my right hand deep into the pocket of my slacks. My fingertips found the rough woven cotton of a folded handkerchief. I pressed my thumb hard into the embroidered letters VAURH. The coarse friction grounded me. It pulled me backward, straight back to the stifling heat of Carver, Indiana, 10 years ago, the exact night the war began. Summer in Carver, Indiana. I was 22 years old. The heat outside was oppressive, but it was nothing compared to the suffocating air inside our house. Carver is the kind of Midwestern town where keeping up appearances is the only religion anyone practices. Our house always reeked of cheap lemon bleach. It was a sterile chemical smell meant to cover up the rot underneath the floorboards. My mother, Diane, treated her children like accessories. We were just props to cover up the fact that she had failed at her own career and hated her life as a housewife. You walked into the living room and it felt like a museum dedicated to my younger sister. An entire wall plastered with Paige's debate trophies, marketing certificates, and sorority photos. They were framed in heavy cherry wood. My existence, on the other hand, was contained to a single faded high school graduation picture. It was shoved all the way to the back of a shelf, hidden entirely behind a plastic potted fern. Diane needed daughters in tailored suits. She wanted white-collar professionals sitting in corner offices so she could brag to the other wives at the country club. She did not want a soldier. She wanted a shiny hood ornament for her ego. That night in July, she finally made her move. I was sitting alone at the kitchen table, drinking a glass of warm tap water. Diane marched in. Her heels clicked sharply against the linoleum. She slammed a thick stack of papers onto the Formica countertop. The heavy thud rattled my glass. "Sign them," she ordered. I looked down. Master of Business Administration. Private student loan applications. $80,000 in debt. She had already forged my initials on the deposit slip. She wanted me to carry a financial death sentence just so she could buy a bumper sticker that said, "Proud parent of a master's graduate." I did not say a word. I reached out and slowly pushed the stack of loan papers aside. From my manila folder, I pulled out a single crisp sheet of paper. United States Marine Corps Volunteer Enlistment Contract. Signed in black ink, dated. I slid it across the table until the edge of the paper touched her manicured fingers. Diane looked down at the bold letters across the top of the page. She stopped breathing. She sat perfectly still in the kitchen chair. I counted the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3. The cheap plastic wall clock ticked off the time. It sounded like a bomb detonator echoing in the dead quiet of the kitchen. 7, 8. The silence was heavy. It pressed down on my chest. 13, 14. Exactly 14 seconds of absolute terrifying silence. Then the skin around her eyes tightened. Her lips curled back into a snarl. "You want to go scrub toilets at some filthy military base," she hissed, her voice vibrating with pure disgust. "You want to roll around in the mud with high school dropouts just to humiliate me." Heavy dragging footsteps padded into the kitchen. My father, Gerald, walked in. He looked at the screaming woman, then down at my enlistment paper on the table. He did not ask if I was sure. He did not tell me to be careful or that he was proud of my courage. He rubbed the back of his neck, refusing to make eye contact with me. "I already bragged to my boss that you were getting your master's degree," Gerald muttered, shaking his head. "If you do this blue-collar nonsense, how am I supposed to show my face at the office tomorrow? You are making a fool out of me." A soft, arrogant scoff came from the hallway. Paige leaned against the doorframe, her eyes glued to her bright phone screen. She did not even bother looking up. "You are always pulling some dramatic stunt for attention, Chloe. It is pathetic." Just like that. In under 60 seconds, the perimeter was completely overrun. I was entirely isolated, no backup, no support. Diane slammed her flat palm on the table again, leaning in close. I could smell her stale coffee breath. "If you walk out that door for this trash camp, you get nothing," Diane stated. The threat was cold and calculated. "Not a single red cent from this house. You will be dead to this family." I stood up. I pushed my chair in. I did not argue. You cannot negotiate with terrorists. I walked upstairs to my childhood bedroom. I shoved 3 pairs of jeans, some plain shirts, and a toothbrush into an olive green canvas duffel bag. I pulled the heavy brass zipper shut. The sound was final. I threw the strap over my shoulder and walked down the stairs, out the front door, and into the dark. The Indiana night air was thick and humid. I stepped onto the wooden porch. A rocking chair creaked in the shadows. Grandma Ruth. She was 78 years old, sitting there with a small bundle resting in her lap. She stood up. Her knees popped, but her grip was like iron when she reached out and grabbed my hand. She pressed a tightly folded square of fabric into my palm. It was rough cotton, an old handkerchief embroidered with the letters H. Inside the fabric, I felt the heavy textured friction of old worn paper. $800 bills. She looked me dead in the eyes in the dark. Her voice did not shake. It was pure steel. "Use this to wipe your sweat," Ruth ordered. "Do not ever use it to wipe your tears. Go." I gripped the cotton square. It was the only real ammunition I had left in the world. "Before I start this engine and leave Carver behind forever, I need to ask you something. Have you ever had to walk away from your own blood just to survive? Have you ever had your biggest sacrifices treated like absolute garbage by the people who were supposed to love you? If you know exactly what that cold betrayal feels like, hit the like button right now. Leave a comment and tell me one thing, just one word that you had to leave behind to find your peace. And please subscribe to the channel. Let us build a community of survivors who know the real meaning of loyalty. I turned my back on the house. I walked down the driveway and threw my heavy duffel bag onto the cracked leather back seat of my beat-up Ford. I climbed into the driver's seat. I gripped the steering wheel and turned the key. The engine roared to life, tearing a massive, violent hole right through the suffocating silence of the Carver night. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal. The tires screeched against the asphalt. The roar of the exhaust grew louder. 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 The dark highway vanished. The sound of the engine morphed, entirely replaced instantly by the blinding, blistering sun and the deafening scream of a Marine Corps drill instructor standing 1 inch from my face. Quantico, Virginia. Marine Corps Officer Candidate School. It is a meat grinder designed to strip you down to your raw nerves. They do not care about your feelings, your background, or your excuses. They care if you can survive. During those first few months, I actually did scrub toilets. Hundreds of them. Just like Diane mocked back in that suffocating kitchen. I spent hours on my hands and knees on freezing concrete floors. I used a tiny, stiff, bristled brush to scrape grime out of the grout. The skin on my knuckles cracked open. Blisters popped, leaked clear fluid, and bled over the bristles. The harsh, industrial bleach burned the open wounds on my hands. I did not complain. I did not quit. Out in the field, it was worse. The Virginia mud is like wet cement. It soaked through my boots. It froze into hard, heavy crusts on my utility uniform during night maneuvers. My muscles burned until they went entirely numb. But I kept my chin tucked. I learned how to strip and reassemble an M4 carbine in the pitch black while my hands shook from the cold. I learned how to throw an 80-pound pack over my shoulder and drag a fellow candidate out of a simulated kill zone while smoke grenades choked my lungs. I traded my sweat, my blood, and my comfort for the one thing I never got in Carver: respect. Real respect. The kind you earn from strangers who trust you with their lives. 3 years later. The grit paid off. The military does not care about what your mother thinks of you. It looks at your performance under pressure. I earned my commission. Then I pinned on the twin silver bars of a captain. I was handed direct command of 38 Marines in a specialized logistics unit. I did not sit behind a desk. I managed supply lines that kept people alive in hostile zones. Ammunition, medical supplies, fuel. If I failed, people died. I did back-to-back deployments. I lived on cold MRE rations and slept on sagging folding cots. I hoarded every single dollar of my hazard pay. While Paige was out buying designer handbags with Diane's credit cards, I was saving my combat pay. I bought a small 2-bedroom condo in North Carolina, paid cash for the down payment. I remember the exact moment the realtor handed me the keys. The metal was heavy and cold in my palm. The jagged edges of the brass dug into my calloused skin. I stood in the middle of the empty living room. It smelled like fresh drywall paint and cheap carpet. But it was mine. Nobody co-signed. Nobody helped. My chest tightened. A surge of pure, unadulterated pride filled my lungs. I was a Marine captain, a homeowner. I commanded troops. I foolishly allowed myself to believe a lie. I actually thought that this time I had done enough. I thought this was the milestone that would finally make the Holloway family proud. I was sitting inside a canvas command tent on base. The air was thick and humid. The heavy green fabric flapped against the metal frame in the wind. I picked up the bulky satellite phone and dialed the Indiana area code. The line clicked. A long hissing wave of static buzzed in my ear. "Hello," Diane answered. Her voice was sharp, rushed. The background noise sounded like a television playing loudly. "Mom, it is Chloe," I said. My grip tightened on the plastic receiver. I kept my voice steady, but my heart hammered against my ribs. "I got promoted today. I am a captain now. I am commanding 38 Marines, and I bought a house, a condo. I closed on it this morning." I waited. The static crackled over the line. I waited for a congratulations, a gasp, a single word of approval, just one crumb of validation from the woman who birthed me. Instead, Diane let out a short nasal sigh. "So what?" she asked. Her tone was flat, bored, annoyed that I was interrupting her day. "Does that mean you have to lead 38 people to sweep up garbage around the base now?" The words hit me like a physical blow to the sternum. The air left my lungs. My vision tunneled for a fraction of a second. Before I could even process the sheer cruelty of the insult, I heard a throat clear in the background. The phone shifted to speaker. The audio hollowed out. "Listen, Chloe," my father Gerald chimed in. His voice was loud, booming, dripping with genuine excitement. "Your sister just got bumped up to marketing manager. She's getting a corner office. We are taking her out to the steakhouse to celebrate. We have to get going. We will talk later." I stared at the green canvas wall of the tent. My combat deployments, my hazard pay, my command. The weight of 38 lives on my shoulders. All of it meant absolutely nothing to them. I was risking my life, and they were throwing a parade because Paige got a desk near a window. I did not argue. I did not yell. I did not try to explain the difference between a military officer and a janitor. "Okay," I said. I hung up the phone. The silence in the tent was absolute. I sat on the edge of the folding metal chair. I reached up and gripped the Velcro name tape on the chest of my uniform. I ripped it off. The tearing sound was loud in the quiet space. I set it on the metal desk. The black stitched letters HOLLOWAY stared back at me. I realized a cold, hard truth about psychological warfare. You cannot change the mind of an enemy who is actively committed to misunderstanding you. They had assigned me the role of the family failure 10 years ago. It did not matter if I came home with a Congressional Medal of Honor. They would just ask why it was not made of solid gold. They needed me to be beneath them so they could feel tall. I reached to the back of the satellite phone. I popped the plastic cover off. I pulled out my personal SIM card. I held the tiny square of plastic between my thumb and index finger. I applied pressure. Snap. The plastic broke in half. The gold chip cracked straight down the middle. I dropped the pieces into the metal trash can. I initiated total radio silence. 7 years. No updates, no holidays, no defending my existence. 7 years passed. 7 years of absolute unbroken radio silence. Silence is a weapon. I learned how to wield it. I did not call. I did not send holiday cards. I did not ask for permission to exist. Today, I am Major Chloe Holloway. I am the commanding officer of a special tactical logistics unit in the United States Marine Corps. I own the supply lines. I have 283 Marines operating under my direct command. I coordinate life or death material transport for 14 different military installations across the country. I do not ask for allowances. I approve monthly operating budgets written in the millions of dollars. Look at my desk. It is a massive slab of gray steel. You will not find cheap plastic flowers on it. You will not find a single framed picture of a smiling family. There is only one personal item: a single cold brass 5.56 millimeter shell casing. I dug it out of the dirt with my bare hands during my first combat deployment. The brass is scratched and tarnished. It sits right next to my keyboard as a constant physical reminder of the cost of failure. The heavy office door opened. Master Sergeant Maria walked in. Her combat boots thudded against the linoleum floor. She set a thick ceramic mug of black coffee down on my desk. The bitter, burnt smell of the dark roast filled the sterile air of the office. Maria is a first-generation immigrant from Guatemala. She has a jagged white scar running across her chin from a shrapnel burst. She does not smile often. But she would take a bullet to the chest for me without thinking twice, and I would do the exact same for her. That is my real family. Blood is just biology. Loyalty is earned in the dirt. 18 months ago, the real turning point happened. The Department of Defense opened bids for a massive tactical partnership. The primary contractor was the Ellsworth Defense Group, a titan in the military-industrial complex. I walked into a secured windowless boardroom in Columbus, Ohio. The air conditioning was freezing. My polished boots hit the hardwood floor with a heavy rhythmic thud. A dozen corporate executives in expensive suits sat around a massive oak table. But I was not looking at them. I was looking at the woman sitting at the head of the table, former Navy Admiral Catherine Ellsworth, now the CEO of the Defense Group. She wore a tailored charcoal suit. Her gray hair was cut into a sharp, uncompromising bob. Her eyes were cold gray and completely ruthless. They were the eyes of an apex predator. She did not smile when I entered. She did not offer small talk. I walked straight to her end of the table. I dropped a 40-page tactical operations plan directly in front of her. The heavy paper slapped hard against the polished wood. Catherine opened the manila folder. She did not flip to the back pages to look at the profit margins. She did not care about the projected quarterly financial gains. She dragged her index finger straight down the middle of the page, tracking my projected casualty rates and field medical logistics. The room was dead silent. The only sound was the crisp rustle of thick paper as she turned the pages. She stopped reading. She closed the folder. She looked up, locking her cold gray eyes onto mine. "Major Holloway," Catherine said. Her voice was a low, commanding rumble. "Why are you prioritizing mobile trauma units and field medivacs over heavy artillery requisition?" It was a test. A trap designed to see if I was a corporate politician or a soldier. I locked my knees. I kept my spine straight. I did not blink. I stared right back into the eyes of the former admiral. Because, Admiral, the mission always comes first. But the lives of the Marines under my command are priceless, I said. My voice was flat and hard. Heavy artillery secures a grid. But there is no amount of corporate money that can compensate for sending my people home in black plastic body bags. I will not bleed my unit dry to save a few dollars on the budget. The executives shifted uncomfortably in their expensive leather chairs. Catherine Ellsworth did not blink. She studied the rigid set of my jaw. She looked at the faded white scars visible on my knuckles. She saw the exact things that my own mother had called disgusting. Then Catherine stood up. She reached her hand right across the center of the oak table. "I have sat in this chair for a long time," Catherine said, her voice cutting through the freezing air of the boardroom. "I have never seen an officer prioritize the pulse of her soldiers over a shiny performance report. The $3.8 million contract is yours, Major." I reached out. We shook hands. Her grip was like a steel vise. That single handshake gave me the one thing my own flesh and blood had violently ripped away from me in that kitchen 10 years ago: honor. My mother told me I was going to be a janitor, a failure, a joke. She could not have been more blind. I sat at a table with giants, and I was treated as an equal. Back in the present, I stood in my office. I held the finalized signed copy of that exact Ellsworth contract. I placed the thick stack of papers inside my heavy steel wall safe. I grabbed the metal handle and pushed the heavy steel door shut. The locking mechanism engaged with a deep, satisfying metallic click. Peace. Total control over my environment. The quiet, disciplined hum of the military base outside my window. I had built a fortress. Then the desk phone rang. It was a harsh, shrill sound. It shattered the silence of the office. The caller ID flashed a civilian area code, Indiana. I stared at the glowing red numbers. My jaw tightened. I picked up the plastic receiver. Major Holloway, I answered. A sharp nasal sigh came through the speaker, a sound I had not heard in 7 years. Are you still alive? It was Paige, my golden child sister, the marketing manager. Her voice dripped with the same arrogant, entitled poison she had learned directly from Diane. I'm getting engaged this weekend, Paige announced. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not apologize for the last decade. Mom says you have to be there. The groom's family has serious money. We need to look like a complete happy family for the photos. Do not ruin this for me. The draft notice was served. The enemy was pulling me out of my fortress, dragging me straight back into the suffocating trenches of Carver. I almost hung up the phone. Carver was not my home anymore. It was a graveyard of bad memories and suffocating expectations. But Paige threw out 2 pieces of information that made my finger freeze over the receiver. First, she mentioned the name of the groom's family, the Ellsworths. My tactical intuition flared red instantly. Second, Paige mentioned Grandma Ruth. She said the 78-year-old woman was confined to a wheelchair now, but she insisted on attending the dinner just to see me. That was my one blind spot, my single emotional weakness. On Saturday afternoon, I drove 4 hours straight back to the glass cage of Carver, Indiana. The heavy tires of my truck squealed against the hot asphalt as I pulled into the parking lot of the Birchwood. It was a high-end steakhouse, the exact kind of place where locals went to pretend they had old money and class. I planned my loadout for the evening carefully. No dress uniform. No shiny silver captain bars or major oak leaves on my collar. No medals on my chest. I wore a $15 navy blue blouse from a discount rack, basic gray slacks, and sensible black flats. The fabric of the blouse was cheap and thin. It rubbed uncomfortably against the raised keloid scar on my shoulder blade. It was the perfect urban camouflage, total concealment. I was walking behind enemy lines, and I needed to remain invisible. I walked through the heavy glass double doors into the restaurant lobby. Diane stood right at the entrance. She was playing the gatekeeper, rigidly controlling the flow of traffic into the private event. She wore a tight cocktail dress and a thick layer of foundation. The air around her was suffocating, heavily saturated with the smell of cheap synthetic rose perfume. When Diane saw me, the rehearsed socialite smile vanished from her face. Her eyes narrowed into slits. She scanned me from the top of my plain hair down to the tips of my flat shoes like a broken barcode scanner. She did not bother to hide her disgust. You look very comfortable, Diane said. Her voice dripped with familiar condescension. I really thought you would wear something a little more presentable for an important event like this. She reached out and clamped her hand onto my shoulder. Her manicured acrylic nails dug hard through the thin fabric of my blouse, pressing into my bare skin. It was a physical power move, a silent command to stay in my place. I did not flinch. I looked past her shoulder. My father, Gerald, stood a few feet away holding a glass of bourbon. He saw me looking at him. He immediately looked down, staring intensely at the geometric pattern on the lobby carpet. He preferred to pretend I was invisible rather than defend his own daughter. Chloe. I turned my head. Paige walked toward me, dragging a tall, nervous-looking man by the arm. My sister wore a custom silk satin evening gown with a high slit up the leg. The smooth fabric caught the light of the expensive chandelier overhead. It looked luxurious. It looked exactly like the hazard pay I used to wire home from a combat zone. Paige stopped in front of me. She did not offer a hug. Garrett, this is my older sister, Chloe, Paige said. She used a slow, pitying tone, the exact tone you use to introduce a distant, unfortunate relative to polite society. She works out at some military camps far away. She does not really have a specific job title or anything important. Garrett offered a polite, awkward smile. He extended his hand. Under the table of my cheap sleeves, my fingers curled inward. My nails dug deep into my calloused palms. I did not snap back. You do not waste live ammunition on foot soldiers. I looked at Paige's shiny diamond ring, then back to her perfectly contoured face. "Congratulations," I said. My voice was completely flat. I did not wait for them to respond. I sidestepped the bride and walked straight past my mother's checkpoint, pushing through the heavy oak doors into the private dining room set for 23 people. The room hummed with the sound of clinking ice glasses and forced polite laughter. I scanned the perimeter. I located my objective in the far back corner of the room. Grandma Ruth sat in her wheelchair, tucked quietly beside a small side table. I walked over and knelt on one knee beside her on the hardwood floor. I took her frail, wrinkled hand in mine. Her skin felt like thin paper over fragile bones. "My girl of steel is here," Ruth whispered. A genuine warm smile cracked across her weathered face. I squeezed her hand. For a second, the noise of the room faded away. Then the heavy oak doors at the front of the room swung open. A figure stepped inside. The solid, authoritative thud of a low heel hit the hardwood floor. It was a sound I knew well. Former Navy Admiral Catherine Ellsworth. She wore a dark tailored suit, looking like a wolf casually strolling into a pen full of noisy, oblivious sheep. Catherine stopped near the head of the long dining table. She slowly scanned the room, taking a calculated visual inventory of the guests. Her cold gray eyes swept past Paige. They swept past Diane. Then her line of sight locked onto the far corner of the room. Her eyes landed directly on my cheap navy blue blouse. The Admiral stopped moving entirely. Her eyes narrowed. A sharp, lethal frown creased her forehead. She recognized the rigid posture. She recognized the face of the Marine Major who had just signed a $3.8 million contract with her defense group. We held eye contact across the crowded room. Target acquired. Before either of us could make a move, a sharp, ringing sound cut through the air. Diane stood at the head of the table. She held a silver spoon, tapping it aggressively against the rim of her crystal wine glass. "Excuse me, everyone," Diane announced, her voice pitching up into a sickeningly sweet tone. "If we could all take our seats. I have a few words I want to say about my beautiful family." The show was about to begin, and the detonator was already armed. The sound of the silver spoon hitting the crystal wine glass was high-pitched and grating. It sliced right through the low hum of conversation. Diane stood at the head of the table. She smoothed down the front of her cocktail dress, plastering on a bright, perfectly rehearsed smile. She started her speech. It was a theatrical performance. She gushed over Paige, praising her incredible vision and her brilliant corporate career in marketing. She pointed out every single relative sitting around the table, proudly dropping their titles. Branch managers, real estate brokers, senior consultants. She went down the line, patting the Holloway family resume for the Ellsworths to see. Then her eyes slid right past me, like I was a ghost, like my chair was completely empty. Robert Ellsworth, the groom's father, leaned forward. He frowned. He was a sharp guy. He noticed the glaring omission. He looked at me, a polite smile on his face. "And what about you, Chloe?" "What do you do?" Robert asked. I opened my mouth. I did not even get the first syllable out. Diane lunged in. "Oh, Chloe just cleans up around the military barracks," Diane said. She waved her hand dismissively like she was swatting away a fly. That sickening socialite smile stayed super glued to her face. "Kind of like a janitor. It pays the bills, I guess." I stopped breathing. The air in the room felt like it turned to lead. My father, Gerald, sat right next to her. The man who had never stood up for me a single day in his life took a slow sip of his bourbon. He nodded along. He actually nodded. "Honestly, every family has one disappointment, right?" Gerald chuckled, a weak, pathetic sound meant to buy the approval of wealthy strangers. "To be honest, we gave up on her a long time ago." In less than 10 seconds, they took 10 years of my life. 10 years of blood, sweat, frozen mud, and hazard pay. 10 years of keeping people alive. They wadded it all up like a piece of cheap trash and tossed it right in the center of the table in front of 23 people. They sacrificed my entire existence just to make themselves look a little taller. I did not cry. I did not stand up. I did not flip the table or yell. I sat perfectly still. I slipped right into parade rest. My spine locked. My shoulders squared. The skin on my face went completely numb. The room went quiet. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning unit in the ceiling. I looked at Diane. I looked at Gerald. I was not angry anymore. I was cold. I was matching up their vicious words with the text message I had just read on Paige's phone out in the lobby. Absolutely do not let Chloe open her mouth tonight. They had a plan. This was not an accident. They formed a firing squad and they all agreed to pull the trigger together. I stopped looking at them. I shifted my gaze straight down the length of the long mahogany table. I locked eyes with the only person in the room who mattered. Former Navy Admiral Catherine Ellsworth. She was sitting perfectly still. She was not a civilian. She was not the kind of woman you could fool with cheap country club politics. Catherine had commanded entire fleets. She could spot a liar from a mile away. Catherine slowly picked up her heavy silver fork. She held it over her porcelain plate. Then she let it drop. Clack! The dry metallic sound echoed through the private dining room. It was not loud, but it cut through the lingering tension like a gunshot. Diane stopped smiling. Her mouth snapped shut. The room went dead silent. Catherine did not look at Robert. She did not look at Paige. She stared dead into Diane's eyes. A slow, terrifying scowl spread across the Admiral's face. Then Catherine turned her head. She shifted her cold gray gaze directly onto me. She raised one eyebrow. Her voice was a low, dangerous rumble that commanded the entire room. Before I tell you exactly what Catherine did next, I need you to do something for me. If you have ever been the scapegoat in your family, if you have ever sat at a table and listened to your own parents tear you down just to build a golden child up, hit the like button right now. Leave a comment and type the word survive. If you know how much strength it takes to keep your mouth shut and your back straight while they lie about you, subscribe to the channel. Let us finish this fight together. Hold on, Catherine said. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Are you the major? That single question from Catherine dropped onto the center of the mahogany dining table like a live fragmentation grenade with the pin pulled out. It did not explode immediately. It just sat there heavy and lethal, forcing everyone in the room to stare at it. Diane panicked. The heavily rehearsed high society mask she'd worn all evening slipped right off her face, revealing the desperate, scrambling fraud underneath. She waved her hands frantically, trying to physically bat away the sudden, crushing humiliation that was closing in on her. Her heavy gold bracelets clanked together. "Oh no, Catherine, you must be mistaken," Diane stammered. Her voice lost its smooth, practiced country club cadence, pitching up into a shrill, grating squeak that sounded like a rusty door hinge. "Chloe is not. She just pushes a broom around the—" Catherine did not yell. She did not argue. The former Admiral did not even shift her weight in her chair. She simply raised one single finger into the air. Just one finger. Total, absolute gag order. "I'm asking Chloe for a sit rep," Catherine said. Her voice was a low, guttural growl that vibrated across the polished wood of the table. It was the voice of a woman who had ordered warships across oceans. "If you do not mind, Diane." My mother snapped her mouth shut so fast her teeth clicked audibly in the quiet room. She swallowed hard. Her throat bobbed visibly under her heavy makeup. Beside her, Gerald froze completely in his chair, looking exactly like a deer caught in the headlights of an 18-wheeler. I did not break my posture. My spine remained locked against the hard wooden back of the dining chair. Both of my hands rested flat on the white linen tablecloth, fingers together, thumbs tucked. The fabric of my cheap $15 navy blue blouse pulled tight across my shoulders. It did not matter what I was wearing. You cannot buy discipline off a clearance rack. I did not raise my voice, but I spoke with the sharp, cold clarity of a combat officer issuing orders over a radio net. "Yes, Admiral," I said. "I am an active duty officer in the United States Marine Corps. I command a special tactical logistics unit." Across the table, Paige's perfectly contoured face contorted. The smug, entitled bride-to-be looked like someone had just slapped her across the mouth with a wet brick. The silk of her expensive dress rustled as she nervously shifted her weight. She whipped her head toward Diane, silently begging our mother to fix this, to spin a lie, to drag me back down to the dirt where I belonged. But Diane was useless. She was too busy gripping the edge of the table. Her knuckles were bone white. She was visibly shaking. The word Admiral had just registered in her small, shallow brain. She had spent the last hour treating Catherine like a wealthy civilian peer, completely blind to the fact that she was sitting across from a 4-star military titan. Catherine kept her cold gray eyes locked on mine. I saw a faint, dangerous glimmer of approval flash in her expression. The interrogation continued. Crisp, professional. No fluff. Just the raw, undeniable data. Head count under your direct command. Catherine asked, her tone completely ignoring the 21 other civilians in the room. 283 Marines, ma'am. I fired back without missing a beat. Operational scope: 14 domestic military installations, East Coast and Midwest sectors. To my left, Gerald's hand began to tremble. The heavy crystal bourbon glass he was holding shook uncontrollably. The ice cubes clanked against the sides of the glass. Clack, clack, clack. It was a pathetic hollow sound, a coward rattling in his cage. He took a nervous gulp, but the liquor did not stop his hands from shaking. Diane stared at me with wide, horrified eyes. Her lips moved, but there was no sound. Then a raw, unconscious whisper slipped out of her mouth, completely devoid of her usual arrogance. How? How is that even possible? She could not compute it. Her brain was short-circuiting in real time. For 10 years, she had built her entire identity around the lie that she had one successful corporate daughter and one massive failure. She could not accept the brutal, undeniable fact that the daughter she threw away now held the power of life and death over hundreds of people. My monthly operational budget could buy and sell Paige's little civilian marketing department 10 times over before breakfast. Robert Ellsworth leaned back in his chair. The groom's father turned his head and looked directly at Gerald. The look on Robert's face was pure, unadulterated disgust. The Ellsworths were a defense family. They understood the weight of a military commission. The rotting, toxic core of the Holloway family was completely exposed under the bright, expensive restaurant chandeliers. They had just publicly mocked a commissioned officer who handled millions in federal assets. Diane felt the judgment closing in on her. Her reptile survival instinct kicked into overdrive. She tried to force that sickening fake smile back onto her face. Her facial muscles twitched as she opened her mouth, desperately preparing to pivot. I could see the gears turning in her head. She was getting ready to claim she was just joking. She was getting ready to play the victim, to act like I had hidden my life from her, just to make her look foolish in front of her future in-laws. Catherine did not give her the oxygen to speak. The former admiral leaned back in her chair, holding the silence in the room like a physical weapon. She reached down into her lap. She slowly popped the heavy magnetic clasp on her expensive black leather handbag. She slid her hand inside the dark compartment. There was a sharp, cold sound of heavy metal shifting against leather. The entire room stopped breathing. The ambient noise of the restaurant outside the private doors seemed to fade away completely. Every single pair of eyes around that long mahogany table snapped down, glued to Catherine's hand as she slowly pulled it out of the bag. Catherine pulled her hand out of her expensive leather bag. She held her fist directly over the center of the mahogany table. She opened her fingers. A heavy gold-plated challenge coin dropped onto the polished wood. The harsh restaurant light caught the etched Marine Corps emblem on its surface. It spun on its heavy edge. Whirr! The metallic hum vibrated against the silence in the room. Then the coin collapsed flat against the table. Smack! Catherine reached out and dragged the heavy coin across the wood, pushing it directly in front of Diane's plate. My defense group just closed a $3.8 million federal contract with Major Holloway's unit, Catherine stated. Her voice did not rise in volume, but the sheer crushing weight of her authority pressed down on every single person in the room. She personally commanded a live-fire tactical exercise, and she sat directly across from me at my boardroom table to negotiate the terms. Complete, utter devastation. The kind of destruction that leaves a crater. Every single drop of blood drained from Diane's face. Her skin turned the color of wet cement. She looked like a corpse propped up in a cocktail dress. Gerald was completely paralyzed. His mouth hung open in a stupid slack-jawed expression. He stared at the glowing gold coin on the table like it was a live snake ready to strike. Robert Ellsworth had heard enough. He leaned forward, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked right at Gerald, his voice dripping with pure, unapologetic disgust. "You just sat there and told me you gave up on a commissioned military officer who handles millions in federal assets," Robert asked. He shook his head slowly. "Are you out of your mind?" The illusion was dead. The hollow, shiny reputation the Holloways had tried to build was smashed to pieces on the floor of a steakhouse. But narcissists never surrender. When they get backed into a corner, they do not apologize. They just change the script. Diane's survival instinct kicked in. Her facial muscles spasmed. She forced her eyes to well up with tears. Genuine wet tears of fake betrayal spilled down her powdered cheeks. She slammed her hand flat against the table. "We did not know," Diane wailed, her voice cracking perfectly on cue. She pointed a shaking manicured finger right at me. "She hid this from us. She kept her entire life a secret on purpose just to set a trap. She wanted to humiliate us in front of your family tonight." It was the classic move: deny the abuse, attack the victim, play the martyr. I did not let her breathe. I did not let her gain an inch of ground. "I reported my promotion to you in year 3, I said. My voice was completely flat, ice cold. I cut right through her pathetic theatrical performance. "I told you I made captain. And you asked me, does that mean you have to lead 38 people to sweep up garbage around the base now?" Diane stopped crying instantly. Her eyes bulged out of her head. The fake tears dried up, replaced by pure, frantic rage. "I never said that," Diane screeched. Her voice echoed loudly against the walls of the private room. "You are a liar. I would never say something so disgusting to my own daughter." "You said exactly that, Diane." The voice came from the back corner of the room. It was not loud, but it carried the heavy, undeniable weight of a judge passing a final sentence. Every head in the room turned. Grandma Ruth sat perfectly upright in her wheelchair. She held her wooden cane firmly with both hands. Her jaw was set. "You put her on speakerphone right in the middle of the kitchen." Ruth continued, staring her daughter-in-law down without blinking. "I was sitting at the table. I heard every single vicious word that came out of your mouth. The final nail in the coffin. Driven straight through the wood by the oldest woman in the room." Diane's mouth opened and closed like a dying fish on a dock. She looked around the table. She looked at Paige, who was currently staring down at her lap, refusing to make eye contact. She looked at Gerald, who was actively shrinking back into his chair, trying to disappear into the upholstery. She looked at the Ellsworths, who were staring at her with naked, unfiltered revulsion. There was nowhere left to hide. The spotlight was too bright. Diane snapped. She could not tolerate the public humiliation for one more second. She shoved her chair back violently. The wood scraped loudly against the floor. She lunged around the table toward me. She grabbed my left arm. Her grip was completely frantic. Her sharp acrylic nails dug hard through my cheap navy blouse, pinching the skin right over my shrapnel scar. "Get out!" Diane hissed through clenched teeth. Her breath was hot and ragged. She yanked my arm hard, pulling me out of my chair. I let her. I did not resist. I did not want to cause a physical brawl in front of my commanding officer's business partner. I let her drag me toward the exit. Diane shoved the heavy oak doors open and pulled me out into the empty red-carpeted hallway of the restaurant. The heavy doors clicked shut behind us. The audience was gone. The Ellsworths were gone. We were completely alone in the quiet, dim corridor. The mask completely shattered. Diane was no longer a polished country club socialite. She was a cornered animal. Her chest heaved. Her eyes were wide, bloodshot, and completely manic. She backed me up against the textured wallpaper of the hallway, still gripping my arm tight enough to leave bruises. She leaned in close. The smell of her cheap rose perfume was suffocating. She prepared to drop the heaviest, most destructive bomb she had left in her arsenal. "You did this on purpose. You ruined this family," Diane hissed. Her voice echoed off the textured wallpaper in the empty, dim hallway outside the private dining room. She was shaking. Her chest heaved, pulling tight against the fabric of her cocktail dress. She gripped my arm, her sharp acrylic nails digging into my skin. If you walk out that door tonight, you lose everything, Diane spat. She leaned in closer. Her cheap rose perfume was suffocating. You will not have a family anymore. You will have absolutely nothing. Emotional blackmail. The final desperate weapon of a cornered narcissist. She was trying to hold my biology hostage. I stared down into her wide, manic eyes. I had looked into the eyes of 19-year-old Marines bleeding out in the dirt. I knew what real fear looked like. This was not fear. This was just the cheap, ugly panic of a fraud losing her audience. I reached up with my right hand. I grabbed her wrist. I did not squeeze hard, but I clamped down with enough solid pressure to let her know she was completely outmatched. I peeled her fingers off my arm one by one. I shoved her hand away and calmly brushed the wrinkled fabric of my cheap navy sleeve. I will have exactly what I already have, I said. My voice was ice. No yelling, no shaking. 283 Marines who will die for me, a career built on actual honor, and a grandmother who remembers my goddamn name. Diane physically recoiled. She stumbled backward a half step. The raw, unfiltered truth hit her like a physical blow. Behind her, the heavy oak door to the dining room cracked open. Just a few inches. Paige peeked out. The golden child looked terrified. Her mascara was smeared. Genuine tears of regret and humiliation stood in her eyes. The fake, glossy world she had lived in her entire life had just been blown to pieces. I did not offer her any comfort. You cannot negotiate with people who only respect you when you have power. I stepped past Diane. I pushed the heavy oak door wide open and walked right back into the private dining room. The silence inside was deafening. 21 people sat completely frozen. Nobody was eating, nobody was talking. The air was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Robert Ellsworth was staring at Gerald with a look of pure contempt. Gerald was staring down at his empty bourbon glass, looking like a whipped dog. I walked straight to my chair. I did not sit down. I stood behind it, placing my feet shoulder-width apart. I clasped my hands firmly behind my back. I will never sit at a table where my parents intentionally degrade my service, I announced. My voice carried clearly to every corner of the room. This is not a punishment. This is a boundary. The heavy door slammed open behind me. Diane rushed back into the room. She was practically vibrating with rage. She could not stand the fact that I was taking control of the narrative. I am your mother. Diane screamed, her voice cracking loudly. Thwack! The sound of solid wood hitting the hardwood floor cut her off instantly. Grandma Ruth sat in the corner of the room. She held her heavy wooden cane in her right hand. She'd just slammed it down on the floor with surprising force. Sit down, Diane, Ruth barked. Her voice was not frail. It was a command. A sharp, undeniable crack of thunder from the matriarch of the family. Diane froze. Her mouth hung open. She looked at Ruth, then at the Ellsworths, who were staring at her like she was a diseased animal. Diane's shoulders slumped. The manic fight completely drained out of her. She shuffled back to her chair and collapsed into the seat. The tyranny was over. The dictator had fallen. I let go of my hands. I walked across the room, my flat shoes making quiet, steady sounds on the floorboards. I stopped right next to Grandma Ruth's wheelchair. I knelt down on one knee, bringing myself down to her eye level. She reached out with her frail, shaking hands. She took my scarred, calloused right hand. She did not look at the raised white lines on my knuckles with disgust. She rubbed her thumb over them gently. She pressed a small, tightly folded piece of paper into my palm. You won, Ruth whispered. Her eyes were bright and wet. I closed my fist around the paper. I stood up. I turned my body and looked straight down the length of the long table. I locked eyes with Catherine Ellsworth. The former admiral was leaning back in her chair, watching the entire execution with quiet, cold approval. Thank you for asking the question, Admiral, I said. Catherine allowed a slow, razor-sharp smile to touch the corners of her mouth. She offered a single crisp nod of her head. Thank you for answering it, Major. I turned on my heel. I did not look at Diane. I did not look at Gerald. I did not look at Paige. They were ghosts to me now. Just collateral damage left behind on a battlefield. I walked out of the room. My strides were measured, disciplined. The heavy oak door swung shut behind me. The brass latch caught. Click. The sound echoed in the empty hallway, locking the past away forever. I drove 3 miles down the dark Indiana highway before I pulled off the road. The heavy tires of my truck crunched loudly over the loose gravel of an empty church parking lot. I shifted the gear into park. I turned the ignition key backward. The heavy engine rumbled and died. The silence inside the cab of the truck was immediate. It was thick. It pressed hard against my eardrums. I reached up and flicked on the dome light. A dim yellow glow washed over the dashboard. I opened my right hand. The small square piece of paper from Grandma Ruth was crushed in my palm. The surface of the paper was rough. I smoothed it out against the hard plastic of the steering wheel. The ink was faded. The handwriting was shaky, but the letters pressed deep into the page. Your mother inherited fear. You inherited courage. Do not wait for them to see you. The people who matter already do. I stared at the black ink. 10 years. 10 years of building heavy steel walls around my chest. 10 years of walking through the dirt pretending I did not care that my own flesh and blood threw me away like a piece of garbage. My throat tightened. A sharp physical ache cracked right down the center of my ribs. The armor broke. I dropped my heavy head onto the top of the steering wheel. The cold plastic pressed against my forehead. I closed my eyes. I cried. It was not a quiet, polite cry. It was a heavy, ragged, violent release. My shoulders shook. 10 years of toxic poison drained out of my lungs in the dark. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the old cotton handkerchief. The rough fabric with the embroidered RH soaked up the warm moisture. It washed the last infected wound completely clean. The fallout swept through Carver like a controlled demolition. Small towns run on gossip. The truth about the Ellsworth dinner bled out into the local country club by Monday morning. Diane lost total control of her fake narrative. The polished, perfect image she spent decades building was gone. She was exposed to the entire community as a fraud who mocked a decorated military officer to impress wealthy strangers. The shame was absolute. My phone screen lit up 2 days later. A text message from Gerald. I am sorry, Chloe. I should have said something at the table. A coward's apology. Too little, too late. He watched me bleed out on the floor and only offered a bandage after the enemy retreated. I stared at the glowing letters on the glass screen. I did not type a response. I did not feel angry. I just felt nothing. I swiped my thumb across the screen. Delete. Gone. Page took longer to break. But a month later, a silver sedan pulled up to the main visitor gate of the Marine Corps base in North Carolina. She drove 12 hours by herself. She sat in the security center looking small and entirely out of place among the uniforms. She did not wear designer silk. She wore a plain gray sweater. The 10-year lie was crushed under the heavy tracks of the truth. She was finally trying to figure out how to be a real sister, stripped of her golden child immunity. Monday morning. 0600 hours. I walked into the command post. The air conditioning was freezing. The fluorescent lights hummed above my head. Master Sergeant Maria walked into my office. Her heavy boots struck the floor in a steady rhythm. She set a thick ceramic mug on my steel desk. Black coffee, dark roast. The bitter burned smell filled the air. Morning, Major, Maria said. She gave a sharp nod and walked back out to the operations floor. I sat down in my heavy desk chair. I woke up my encrypted laptop. A secure email channel blinked on the screen. The sender was Catherine Ellsworth, Major Holloway. Families are complicated, but the battlefield is not. We received your revised logistics parameters. The contract is expanding. Prepare your unit for the next phase. I read the words twice. I leaned back in my chair. A slow, quiet smile spread across my face. I thought about the words Diane spat at me across that dining table. Chloe just cleans up around the military barracks, kind of like a janitor. Diane was actually right about one thing. I am a cleaner. I clean up the risks. I clear the threats. I manage the chaos so that the ignorant, ungrateful civilians sleeping in their comfortable beds can stay perfectly safe. It is a dirty job. It does not come with a corner office. It comes with scars. But it is a job that matters. I reached across the steel desk. I pressed my fingertips against the brass 5.56 millimeter shell casing. The metal was cold and heavy. Blood does not automatically make a family. Biology is just a random lottery. True family is forged in the dirt. It is built on mutual respect, unwavering loyalty, and absolute honor. You do not owe your sanity to people who treat you like a burden. I do not need cowards who have never seen a real battlefield to validate my medals. I do not need a narcissist to tell me I have value. I took the ashes of their contempt and I built an empire of pride right on top of it. I survived the war they started in that kitchen 10 years ago. I did not just survive it, I won. Thank you for listening today. Please hit the like button, leave a comment about your own journey, and subscribe to the channel. I truly appreciate your support. Stay strong and see you next time.